Okay, thank you very much, Hassan, and thank you to our panelists for agreeing to be part of this. So, as I argued before, I think we are in an interesting time. We have a bit of deficit of imagination to reimagine the systems that we're all working in. And so I'm really hoping we have a perfect panel to actually help us address this deficit and help us actually start the process of rethinking what development might look like in Pakistan and beyond. So when we do training with government officials on helping them reimagine bureaucracies, we do a very silly game with them, which I'm going to play on you, which is subtraction or addition. So for example, let's imagine you have a school and you subtract the teachers. What does the education system look like in that way? Or you have a school and you subtract the whiteboards or blackboards. What does the school education system look like this way? So I'm going to have a quick rapid fire with you and think about the development sector in Pakistan. If you can either subtract one thing or add one thing, and you get a bonus if you both subtract and add something, what would that be to actually reimagine completely the way development is done in Pakistan?
All right. Yep. One thing that I believe should be subtracted is this approach of knowing the solution in the mind. We always chase these wicked problems with the solution already in our head, that what we want to achieve out of it. So if we take that out, I believe we might get more room for actually ingenuity. And another thing that we can add for is the appetite to experiment. It's all right if we fail, it's all right. So experiment lots of works in bits and pieces and then work the experiment. So it's just two things.
Okay.
On the same line, I think I would subtract projectization in the development sector and add in common sense.
Good one.
Yeah, so I basically work more with the government side of the thing. So I think I will subtract the silos that we don't need to have these verticals and think of services as horizontal so that citizens can get services in a better way.
I would subtract log frames, monitoring plans out, and I would add creativity and imaginative thinking to our work.
Okay, so let me challenge you a little bit on this one, as in all the things that you're saying, the expert bias, the silos, the log frames, all these things are actually what makes fundamentally a bureaucracy these days. So how might we go about this, right? So if you really want to say, how do we subtract some of these elements that we know are not working, but yet all of us are still somewhat stuck with, what might we want to do it? What would be ways we can gather forces, join forces collectively, to actually call the bluff and say, look, we really know this is not working, we're all stuck with it, but what can we do about this? What could be things that we could be doing? Or do you see this already happening maybe?
So the first thing is to start from the tiny step. It's not something that you will be able to overhaul overnight. So bring the government decision maker to the table, the bureaucrats essentially, who don't understand this at the moment. Because they have been structured, they've been taught, they have been a part of an environment where they understand that I get a log frame, I get an M&E, I get those 100 few pages of reports that no one needs, they can stock them in the shelf, right? And boom, it's done. Get the donor in the room, because he or she, the company actually asks for it. They say that we want such a structure, such a framework, right? And then, of course, get those practitioners in the room, the consultants. So whenever there is a herd mentality, it's an approach. Right now, it's PDIA is cool, so you'll see that most of the consulting organizations will go to Lance Pritchard, they get those certificates done, and boom, they get more contracts. So I believe get everyone in the room and start experimenting, one tiny step, one project. We use those terms, A/B testing and whatnot. The same needs to be applied here. Yeah.
So I think along the same lines, in terms of removing projectization, it really is looking at the heart of how we want to address development challenges. So I think we need to engage with our development partners in a conversation saying, okay, which challenge is it that you would like to focus on? And how can we do that in a way that doesn't tie us to achieving specific objectives in a specific time frame? How can we just have your freedom to work on the challenge, use every piece of knowledge and intelligence and creativity that we have available to us in order to provide you with a plan, test it, explain our failures, explain our learnings, and then use that experimental learning to improve again. And I think we're not ready to have that conversation, unfortunately. And UNDP is part of that because as we depend quite highly on funding from other partners, we are still caught in that trap where we want to do everything that we've talked about in the Acceleration Lab. We want to try and do design thinking, we want to do design research, we want to meet with every stakeholder in the sun, talk to grassroots innovators, and luckily through our youth empowerment program, and a lot of my team is sitting here today, we've had the pleasure of actually doing that. But then we've sort of been doing that in parallel to implementing a traditional development program, because with our donor funding, we still have to reach X amount of youth within X amount of time, X amount of jobs have to be produced. So we've tried to enhance the quality of our work through innovation, and I feel that it's been super successful. But at the same time, we will not receive any more funding unless we achieve those basic baselines. So I think we really need to reimagine that system of how we use donor money, and obviously that is taxpayer money as well. We can't not be accountable, we can't not be transparent, but how can we reimagine what transparency means? Where we say we tried, we failed, this is the result, and next time we'll do better. And hopefully in a world where that is good enough, we will be able to do it.
Yeah, so I think while the governments and the development sector hasn't been able to get a lot of success in the challenges that they are trying to solve, but on the side we do see some of the private sectors creating a lot of values for themselves, for the shareholders and for their customers. So I think we can learn some non-traditional approaches from them. Like one thing that I particularly like about the Amazons of the world is that they work backward. They said that this is the outcome that we want. Let's say it's very obvious that many of the SDGs will not be achieved by 2030, and someone said actually probably by 2090 we might be able to achieve them. But let's say we are able to achieve them in 2030, all of these SDGs, then and then work backward. Where are the issues that we need to fix? For example, let's just take example of in Pakistan, if someone wants to adopt a child, the laws are from 1800s. So there are like things like that at every level of the society which are actually inhibiting anything that can actually accelerate the solution of the problem. And the issue is that interventions are helping in some context, but the population increases just so much that many of these interventions will not scale. So yes, identify the exact objective that we need to achieve by a certain date, and then just work backward and see how we can actually get it done, and then hold people accountable who are responsible for it.
I mean, I think I'm also going to sort of repeat some of the things that Laura said, but when it comes to log frames and traditional monitoring plans, my argument is that, well, it's a no-brainer. Because what you are doing is you are measuring citizen access, for instance, by the number of people attending or, using those services. You're not really getting a picture of what is their experience in using these services. You're not getting a picture of whether they're returning again to these services and for how long. So when I see a monitoring plan and I see 10% of this many people will have access to this service, it says nothing to me. So when I ask, when you will do your project again in 2020, what is your argument for doing this again? What does it mean to do it again? And if I get the response saying, well, 100 people access these services, it means nothing. So if you want to do better work, if you want to create better programming, you need to understand these learnings. And then it's a no-brainer for another reason. When you go to the donors for money, as opposed to saying 100 people access this service, isn't it more better to have a better argument of why they're using it? And when you want to change it, what are the reasons that you want to change it? When you have those results on the ground, it becomes actually, your job is easier to convince. If you don't have the full picture, you can never make a convincing argument of going forward. So for me, it's a no-brainer. This is the only way to do better work. Whether we're doing this or not, I see pockets. For example, I've worked very closely with Laura's youth program and others in UNDP. There is appetite for that kind of change. But again, there are pressures that we need to address. In terms of when I talked about imagination and creativity, I mean, it's far more interesting to do your job that way, you know? I mean, you know, Giulio, we talked about it in Bangkok. When you talked to me about the lab, you said, find projects that do interest you, you know, that you are passionate about. And as a project manager, wouldn't your day be more interesting when you become a little bit more creative? You don't have to do things the same way. So you can also find a balance, like Laura's program is finding some balance where they have to meet the numbers, and that is what all innovation leads and champions at UNDP seem to be doing, is that we try to find a compromise. All right, you want to reach these numbers, okay, but there's ethnographic studies we can do. We can try to find ways to understand behaviors to support this. So these are some of the ways we're doing it in UNDP.
Thank you. So I would like to take a Sims challenge. Can we ask the group? Can we ask you, how many of you really believe we are going to achieve the SDGs by 2030? Raise your hands. Okay, one person. Okay, fabulous. Okay, so if I take this first round and what we are here for, and we all believe we are not going to achieve them, and we need to reimagine the system, and it sounds like part of it is conversations that are not happening, taking approaches from different sectors. That conversation needs to happen if we really want to achieve them, right? And so the interesting question is, for me, is how do we use excuses, quote unquote, like the Accelerator Lab, to initiate that type of conversation? Because if it's not happening, we are not, we already know we're not going to achieve them, but it's going to be even beyond 2090, right? So if we not start calling the bluff a bluff. So, okay, I'm going to play a second game to our poor panelists. So one of the other things that we do when we ask people to imagine completely different systems is to think about, you know, the famous sentence, the future is already here but not evenly distributed. So what is the future that is already here in Pakistan that points to a different way of doing development? What are examples? Where are pockets of energy that is happening? And if I can give you a silly example, but I like this a lot. So we study, as I said, at the MIT, this phenomenon called lead user innovation. And one of the companies that I'm working with is Ford. Now Ford, as you can imagine, has plenty of engineers, very high-end engineers. Now what do high-end engineers hate the most inside the bureaucracy? Among other things, the IT department, because it prevents them from downloading all sorts of different things that they actually need. And so they create all sorts of hacks to get around the prohibition from the IT department, which is a little bit like the hacks that you are doing around the log frames and all these other things, right? So at one point, the head of innovation at Ford documented all the hacks, and from night and day, what were the hacks became the new IT system of Ford. So they actually legalized all the hacks developed by the engineers, and what was before illegal, the day after becomes the new system. So one of the interesting things is basically the hacks were the future that was already here, right? Pointing to a different type of needs, a different way of doing things. But at the moment, the bureaucracy said, no, don't go there. It's not allowed to do that. But if you actually flip a switch, they all of a sudden become the new future. So what is happening around here in Pakistan that already points to different way of doing things, and you can talk about your work or other examples, etc. Maybe we start from the other end this time.
So I think I will probably talk about the hacks within UNDP. Because, you know, UNDP is a very large bureaucracy. There's a lot of multiple interests and stakeholders that we have to kind of deal with. And a lot of barriers that we have to deal with. So one of the hacks that we sort of do is we say a lot of yes, sure, we'll get this done, and we reach the numbers, but yet we go and find other partners who we can do some of the more creative work with. And one of the things I found that really changed, really changed the culture within our organization, changed, I think, the solutions we were able to provide, is partnerships and conversations between our projects and the innovators. So some of the people you meet in the innovation gallery today, these are the people I would invite into our offices. There are many people in this room today who have come to the UNDP office and had a conversation. And so had a conversation about the work that they do and the solutions that they could provide. It's a very simple hack. It's not big technology. It's nothing groundbreaking. But just this kind of conversation of bringing two different people together has really changed UNDP Pakistan's culture and the way we work massively.
So I think I will just say that even in this room, there will be people who are more smarter than about the things that I want to talk about. But unless I'm being transparent about the things that I'm doing, they will not be engaged. So I think the key, and this needs to scale at a national level. So she did mention about transparency, but I think transparency and civic engagement are the two things that has worked a bit in Pakistan in small pieces. Like our digital policy was formed using the feedback. The whole chapter on the people with disability came through the feedback from citizens. And this needs to just happen more. I think a very recent example in this case is the citizen portal that it was initially developed by the KP government, but then the new PM launched it nationwide. It did have some glitches in the start, but it is working for many people. I think these things need to stay relevant. We need to learn from that. Okay, by opening, so people were like afraid that if they will open doors and the PM office will be swamped with so many requests. But at the end of the day, that's the role of the government, like to facilitate the citizens. And so I think by correctly using technology and having this outcome in mind, that we need to every day, every week, we need to think how we can be more transparent, how we can engage more citizens. We can do a lot more things, and maybe we can still achieve SDGs, but not with the current practices and methods. There are good learnings, civic engagement, and transparency is the key.
I think obviously again from the youth perspective, one of the key places where I see a lot of appetite for change and innovation is coming from the youth of Pakistan themselves. I don't know if Giulio, if you know, but basically like 68% of Pakistan's population is under 30 and like 27% is in that age bracket between 15 to 29. So they're not only the future of Pakistan, but they're the present. And I think we really need to see how we actually make them part of the decision-making process, because right now they're still pretty excluded. So we talk about youth-led inclusive development, youth-led interaction for SDGs, but it isn't really a reality. And we see a lot of youth that are working at the grassroots, these grassroots innovators that you referred to earlier on. There are so many youth across this country that are working on really tough issues: interfaith harmony, anti-harassment, standing up for their educational rights, their political rights. They're fearless and they're ready to think of a new world, because I think currently with the level of exclusion that we're experiencing in Pakistan, they don't want this to be their future. So I think we really have to see how organisations like UNDP and others can make space to really facilitate them doing what they know what needs to be done, because they are like that person who's there, they have the issue, they have the need, and they're looking for solutions. So one of the hacks that we have done through our team, which has not been easy, and with the help of the innovation team, it's taken us like 6 iterations of it to get it almost right, is where we launch a youth innovation challenge, and we give youth the sort of ground to say, okay, what do you want to do to achieve a change in your community? They come back to us with their ideas, and then we're able to give them small grants directly for them to implement at the grassroots level, and then we try and facilitate their scale up. So that is something that through UNDP's procedures is almost unheard of, but we have done it, and now that has become the new norm, that we are able now to give money directly to the end user in order for them to experiment, to test, and then for UNDP to facilitate scale up. So for us, that really has been the biggest achievement we've had so far.
I absolutely agree with what Laura said. I believe the greatest potential that we have amongst any other is that human capital, and it's very young, right? And as you mentioned earlier, that it's a social capital that developed, the social development that actually helped those nations that were saving lives during events like tsunami. So just to give you an example, recently an 11-year-old came and pitched to us an idea, right? And it was a great idea. And the idea was that how to provide location, precise location, street level in areas which are very congested to firefighters and to rescue workers, right? And how she came up with the idea was that once I ordered a food panda and they couldn't find my house and it is a bit congested neighborhood, and they kept figuring out, despite the fact that all have those apps and mobile laid down on Google Maps and Waze and whatnot. And the point is how they think that they can experiment. By the time she's 18, she would have made many more such experiments. She would be far better off than people sitting here in the room who probably started off thinking about these on these grounds very late. So you can't shut them up right now. They know that they have this urge to do something, to be part of it. And there are no more barriers anymore because of the communication that's so open. Everyone is opening up. The corporates now, they know that they can't innovate the moment there becomes huge bureaucracies. Like you guys are thinking now that UNDP is a huge bureaucracy and we need to innovate how we do business. So similarly, they are coming up with these innovation labs, with these design labs, with new ways of doing business, right? And they're backing lots of entrepreneurs, lots of youth to work with them. So that's changing. Otherwise, earlier you would see big celebrities actually vouching out for and, doing PR for all these bigger organizations. Now you'll see very young influencers, people who do microblogging. This tool of being connected to everyone has really shaped them, has empowered them, that sky's the limit. So, and then opening up to allow them to experiment is also very important, and the ingenuity that you have to encourage. The example, for instance, that you just showed of the barber in London, we don't bring anyone when we talk about any long-term, short-term, 2-year, 3-year plan, whether it is the planning commission, there are many folks here sitting from the government, we don't bring people from all walks of life. It's always the same people who believe, you believe, or we believe, have the solution. And there are only two terms discussed, micro and macro. There is no individual, there is no exo, hexo, and there is no overall a systems approach. What about the cultural changes, the behavioral and all? But that's not happening. People are encouraging, we're seeing a nudging unit opening up, the delivery units and all that, focus more on behavioral insights and all. So I believe the time is right. There's a huge potential, but I really hope that we provide them all with the right tools and the platform so they can, make use of their time.
Thank you. Can I dig deeper a little bit more on this particular issue? So there is this massive human capital available. You tell us, UNDP, what you should be doing or not be doing to tap into this human capital. I'm picking on the two of you who are not UNDP at the moment. UNDP Accelerator Lab, don't go there, don't even think about it. And on the other hand, do this, please.
Okay. So, talk with the non-traditional customers. So in a very traditional form, we'll talk to government. Whenever we think development, we'll talk to consultants and we'll talk to some larger players in the room. Talk to people that you've not talked to before. Bring in kids, bring in the private sector. Just to give you an example, I don't know if you're aware, but Sialkot, the businessmen actually gathered around and they built an international airport for themselves. You won't see such examples around, right? So otherwise, in a very traditional form, you would have relied on dev sector, on funders and donors and government to help you. No, so they know that we want something, let's do it together. And it's a very nice, great international standard airport. And now what has happened is that many other people were encouraged that if they could do it, we could do it too. So the entire city of Karachi runs on community and civic engagements, right? You'll see very, very little governance involved there from the government side. And if we bring those people in the room that have the potential, they've experimented earlier, and that we should now allow more, I believe that is one way for UNDP to open its doors. Talk to more people. As you said, you've talked to many people in the room, Binesh, that was sitting here. And this needs to happen more. Yeah.
Sorry, before I get that, I'm going to be very pesky. You told us what to do. Give us one thing we really shouldn't be doing.
We shouldn't be doing. Oh, okay. So, when we always talk about, again, we have this SDG in mind at the moment. I'll be very open. So we say zero hunger. We don't say that eliminate hunger by this percentage, right? And this is right around the corner, the goal that needs to be achieved. So these are very ambitious targets. So you need to open up to some really radical solutions, not traditional. But how do you get so radical? By providing that platform. So I guess stop being traditional in the approaches that we do. Because we always ask that, I want you to do something for a 3 to 6 month or a 1 year. So let them do it. Give them a space to come up with whatever they want. And let's see that we can scale it up. And let a lot of people do it in pockets. So we, again, as I said earlier, we do it with a particular goal in mind, and it's a very transplantation approach as well that's involved, unfortunately, whether it's UNDP or other similar organizations, that we say that it worked in Cape Town, it worked in Kenya, it worked in Ghana, so it will work here as well. So we just do the isomorphic mimicry, we just transplant those ideas, and we say it would work here as well, which is not the case mostly.
So you have asked two questions. So
Yep.
shall I answer the first one or the second one? Okay. So I think the key is just to engage youth more. So the one thing that we have tried and which has worked in our case and should work in UNDP case, and I think you guys are already doing, is that in the fellowship program that we are running with KPIT board and another multilateral organization in KP, we just engage youth to co-create solution with the government. So I think the same needs to happen. So whatever channels the youth is using, let's say if they have any organization that doesn't have an Insta account is not basically engaged with the youth because they are no longer on Facebook or other media, they are on Insta and Snapchat. So you need to like reimagine the communication channels and everything, that how you're engaging youth. Or probably a really radical thing that a UNDP can start doing is that maybe Ignacio hire one of the chief of staff who's a youth person, Laura, all the program leads have like youth person who like spending 50% of their time as a chief of staff following all these leaders, whatever they are doing, and then spending 50% of their time actually talking to the youth that what your problems are, and then trying to provide feedback back to whoever they are working with. These will grow into leaders, and they will also try to ensure that there is no communication barrier because of the hierarchies within the organization. So I think maybe something like that can be tried. I don't know if there is a budget for it.
So we didn't plan this, but as it happens, our panel ends on where we started, which was need to radically reimagine systems, right? We started with development, we ended with education, but the theme runs throughout. And the question, of course, is how, at this point in time, is A, how do we stretch our imagination so that we are not stuck to the most obvious solutions? So this is why we add, subtract things, right? We look at the future, what is already here. But the most important thing is how don't we remain stuck with just imagining, right? How do we move from this radical stretching of our thinking to actually making things happen in the real world? That work is much more long-term, is much more difficult. Again, there are no quick fixes, but if we don't start these conversations now, we can definitely forget about the SDGs as our quick poll already showed us. So this is an invitation to join the lab in having this type of conversation now, because the time is to have them is right now. If we wait more, then definitely we're not going to get there. Let me please do a round of applause to thank our fantastic panelists.